so I can stay looking youthful. I don't want that old bloat monster face, the Michelin Man. I want the muscle gains. I highly doubt I'm going to get most of them back, but maybe a hint of it. But I don't want that Michelin Man face back again in the future. Vigorous Steve here, back with some more blood work results. And in this video I actually want to discuss two blood work results. The ones I took last Sunday on June 27th and the ones I took about 3.5 weeks ago on Friday, June 4th. Now the ones I took on June 4th are a lot more extensive than the ones I took last weekend, because I had an appointment scheduled with a cardiologist on June the 5th, so that's the day after. And I wanted to get as much blood work markers tested leading into that appointment. So I tested a few cardiac markers, which we'll discuss in this video, just to have some additional data points for the cardiologist to review. Now, after reviewing with the cardiologist, she advised me to do an ultrasound before scheduling a cardiac MRI or a CT scan. Again, guys, I have no symptoms. There's no issues with my heart. I just want to get a baseline reading, which I should have done 10 years ago before starting performance-enhancing drugs. But again, that's in hindsight. I just want to have a reading of heart functioning before I decide to go back on performance-enhancing drugs in the future. That being the anabolic androgenic steroids, considering that I'm still running a peptide here and there, which are not known to have a negative effect on lipid levels. So, I did very extensive blood work on June the 4th, which we'll use as a base to discuss the blood work from this weekend, because I just got an update for particular markers which were off, and I changed some things to my protocol, so I wanted to see what kind of an effect that would have on my lipid concentrations, for example. So we'll use the June 4th results as a baseline for this video, and then we'll compare between June 4th and June 27th. For the guys who are new to the channel, let me give you guys a brief update. I'll link the appropriate videos discussing those particular results a little bit more in depth, so you can watch those here. In October 2020, I was diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I decided to come off cycle and do a post-cycle therapy. The non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is now pretty much resolved, but I will schedule another ultrasound to confirm, also on July 1st, and then we'll go over that somewhere at the end of the week, just to make sure that that's now completely taken care of. I did my post-cycle therapy. That was successful. You can watch that video right here. And then a little bit later, I decided to incorporate a freebie protocol called icing the testicles, where you apply an ice pack wrapped in a towel. Again, guys, no direct contact, for 20 minutes, 3 times per day. Sounds absolutely silly, but it was able to raise my testosterone concentrations a little bit. And most of the blood work that I've received after discussing this publicly showed that it was able to raise testosterone concentrations as well. I only received one blood work result where it did make a difference over the duration of a couple months. Again, that guy's testosterone levels were already 700 nanograms per deciliter at the start of his experiment. But for most of the guys, there was at least some sort of a result. And then fast forward to today, I've been doing the icing the testicles protocol for almost 3.5 months now. I've been pretty much following the same diet, so that's a ketogenic diet. I'll link that right here so you guys can see what my current diet is. It's about 2,500 calories per day. I'm well aware that there's some fruit at the end of the day and a little bit of yogurt. That's only post-workout or on days that I work out. So that's 4 times a week that I have a little bit of yogurt and fruit before bed. From my experience, it doesn't kick me out of ketosis. I'm always in ketosis the following morning. So it's not exactly a 100% ketogenic diet, but it seems to work well for me. So that diet hasn't really changed over the last couple of weeks, but I do feel that this 2,500 calories that I'm eating on a daily basis is now pretty much a deficit. Right? I'm doing 30 minutes of cardio per day. That hasn't really changed. 30 minutes of fasted cardio per day. I'm not using any fat burners. I used to do that while I was doing the fasting mimicking diet, but I've discontinued the fat burners. So I'm doing 30 minutes fasted cardio per day, eating about 2,500 calories on a daily basis. But over the last, let's say, month, I feel that this 2,500 calories is now a deficit. And I've lost a little bit of weight. I went from 93 kilos, I believe I was on the last update video. Now I'm about 90 kilos, sometimes even 89. So I dropped a few kilos in the process. But to be fair, I also made a couple adjustments to my performance-enhancing drug protocol after June the 4th. Because at the time, I was running 5 milligrams Nebivolol, 20 milligrams Telmisartan, 10 milligrams Ezetimibe, right? That was my overall ancillary health protocol. Then I was also using 2 units of growth hormone, which I discontinued. And I was, at the time of the blood work, I was running 100 micrograms kisspeptin 10. And at the time, I think I was already on 2 milligrams of GHK copper per day. So all those things contribute into the blood work from June the 4th. After discussing what I was running with the cardiologist, she advised me to discontinue the Nebivolol and the Telmisartan because, of course, that has a bit of an effect on your blood pressure and your heart rate. And she would like to have an accurate baseline of heart functioning without these medications in my system. So I discontinued those. So that's 3.5 weeks ago, and it will be about 4 weeks by the time I do the ultrasound, MRI, or CT scan in Thursday, right? A couple days from now. So we'll have an accurate reading of heart functioning without any ancillary medications in my system. I also wanted to discontinue the Nebivolol because it has been linked to lower sex hormone levels in the bloodstream. But based on my latest blood work results, there isn't really a change. I also wanted to discontinue the Ezetimibe just to see how much of an effect that would have on my lipids without any other negative compound in my system, like an anabolic androgenic steroid, which I was running a couple months ago, right? So I wanted to see how much of an effect the Ezetimibe had on my lipids and my lipoprotein a, which I was able to test on June the 4th and June 27th. I believe previously I asked for it at Bria Labs, but I guess there was some miscommunication. So they said they didn't have that marker available. But then the last time I asked and wrote it down for them, they were able to test lipoprotein a also. So those are pretty much the changes which occurred between June 4th and June 27th. Diet stayed the same, cardio stayed the same, discontinued the growth hormone, the Nebivolol, the Ezetimibe, the Telmisartan, and the kisspeptin 10, but I continued with GHK copper. That's basically the only peptide performance-enhancing drug or exogenous compound that I'm running right now. Well, melatonin, 6 milligrams before bed. If you want to count that, I'm also on 6 milligrams melatonin before bed. Right? Can't forget about the melatonin. That's also a bioidentical hormone that I'm taking in exogenous supplementation form. So the GHK copper is now at 5 milligrams per day. I feel that it's good. But not good enough that I'm willing to share my progress pictures, to be honest. I took some progress pictures last Sunday. I'm not very happy with how I look, to be honest, so I won't be sharing those. I did take a baseline, or I will take some baseline progress pictures in case I do go back on cycle. Like based on his blood work, I'm pretty happy with the results. Besides a couple markers, they're still off. But I feel overall that this blood work is good enough to go back on a very moderate baby cycle, right? So I'll take some before pictures when that day comes. I'm just not very willing to share how I look right now. So let me give you guys a front of a bicep, a little bit of a peek, but yeah, not that substantial. I pretty much plateaued on my strength. I don't feel that I'm progressing anymore. I could, of course, increase my calories again to 2,800 and then 3,200, for example. But again, I want to have absolute confirmation that the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is resolved, which I will do with another ultrasound on July the 1st. And then again, I might not increase the calories beyond 3,000 because again, all the calories are passing through the liver. And now that I have a predisposition for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, right, it might be easier to return in the future. I don't want to increase my calories too much. So that will be pretty much a handicap going forward. I might always be in some sort of caloric restriction unless I not train so extensively, right? So I'm just waiting for the results, and then I might increase my calories a little bit. But when I look in the mirror, I'm not too pleased. Anyway, maybe in the future I can make some proper adjustments. I just want to make it clear before we get into it that I had to make a couple adjustments using Photoshop because particular markers which are related to each other, they're spread out over several different pages in the blood work results that I received. So I used Photoshop to group those particular markers together. Of course, I did not change any of the values or the actual results. I just grouped everything together. But if a particular marker is displayed within a wrong category, that's because I moved them around from one page to the next. So it's a little bit easier to present all the results in a YouTube video. Without further ado, let's get into the blood work. Feel free to use the timestamps to skip ahead or go back and watch certain segments again. On both June the 4th and June the 27th, I did my urinalysis just to show that I'm hydrated. So briefly go over those. In both results, the color of the urine is pale yellow. It's clear. There's no glucose in my urine, and no is there any protein, blood, nitrites, ketones, urobilinogen, bilirubin, or leukocytes. On June the 4th, my specific gravity was 1.005, and on the 27th, 1.003, and the pH was 6.5 to 6. So that just indicates hydration. I don't want to do blood work where I go in and analyze kidney function, complete blood count, and then if markers are off, I have to worry, was I hydrated enough, right? So I always do a urinalysis before, just to make sure that I'm in a hydrated state. And in case something is off, I can't blame that on dehydration. I have to look into the specific organ or functioning of other blood work markers to see what's actually going on. So in both cases, I was hydrated. I always drink about 1.5 to 2 liters of water before going in for blood work. I only tested my complete blood count on June the 4th. I did not retest that again on the 27th because complete blood count doesn't change that fast. Usually see that changes in hematocrit, red blood cell count manifest over the duration of a month, 3 months, maybe even 4 months. So I only check that once in a while. Again, I'm not on any testosterone, primobolan, or anything else that could alarmingly erase hematocrit levels over a short period of time. That might change in the future. But over the last couple of months, my hematocrit has pretty much stayed the same, around even as low as 39%, I believe. So that's below the reference range for men. Right now we're at 43%. The last update I did with the icing the testicles video, I think I was 42% at my hematocrit. I'm assuming that's pretty much the same. So between the icing the testicles video on beginning of May the 2nd, I think, my hematocrit was 42%. My red blood cell count was about 4.4 million cells per cubic millimeter. And now my hematocrit is 43%, and red blood cells came up a little bit to 4.73 million cells per cubic millimeter. I did not retest this again. I'm assuming this is pretty comparable, right, to where I am now. Pretty much all the markers are in range. I did notice that my eosinophils were a little bit elevated. That's probably because I was administering an underground lab or Chinese generics of kisspeptin 10 on a daily basis. GHK copper coming from an underground lab on a daily basis, and then growth hormone. So that's, 3 injections per day, right? And that might change the eosinophil percentage on the white blood cell differential. And you see that very commonly on people who take performance-enhancing drugs, that the eosinophils are slightly elevated because you're piercing the skin multiple times. And again, what is the purity? What is the sterility of the Chinese generics? I'm not really sure. If I were to only run growth hormone, my eosinophils always stay in range. But again, I was running 2 peptides at that time, June the 4th. And I've seen these readings actually also on exogenous testosterone, where my eosinophils were slightly elevated on the white blood cell differential. Not something I'm concerned with. I see this actually quite frequently. And when I say quite frequently, I mean on my blood work results and the blood work results of my clients who also run performance-enhancing drugs, whether that's pharmaceutical grade, Chinese generics, underground labs, etc. Eosinophils might be elevated, and usually the exogenous administration is the root cause of it. Let's move on to blood chemistry. I have a couple comparison points between June the 4th to June the 27th. I did not retest all of the markers, just the ones that I was interested in or that I wanted to discuss with the cardiologist on Thursday. On June the 4th, my blood glucose was 82 milligrams per deciliter, blood urea nitrogen 20.3 milligrams per deciliter, creatinine 1.11 milligrams per deciliter. I believe on May the 2nd, it was around 1 milligrams per deciliter. but I reintroduced pre-workout, right? Gorilla Mode Nitric, which has a little bit of creatine. And I always notice from my blood work results that once I add in creatine supplementation, my serum creatinine levels shoot up a little bit. And when I say shoot up, it's like 0.1, 0.2 milligrams per deciliter, depending on the amount of creatine supplementation that I have every day. So when you compare my creatinine from June the 4th at 1.11 milligrams per deciliter, you see that it increased a little bit on June the 27th to 1.15 milligrams per deciliter. Again, I expect that to go up when I increase the training intensity again in the future. Again, I'm right now maxed out, but if I were to decide to go back on cycle, I'm sure my training intensity would increase. I might increase my creatine intake to 2 scoops Gorilla Mode Nitric a couple times per week. And then this creatinine will slowly increase based on my training intensity as well. And just keep in mind that serum creatinine or urine creatinine is not the sole indicator of kidney function. Nowadays, we prefer to use cystatin C, especially in individuals who train frequently, because an additional amount of muscle mass or creatine supplementation or even other supplements like PQQ, for example, they're all able to raise creatinine concentrations in the bloodstream a little bit disproportionately to the average population. So if you see your creatinine elevated or a little bit more than elevated to the point your kidney specialist is a little bit concerned, check your cystatin C. That's for trained individuals, especially the ones that take supplements, a little bit better indication for kidney function. So on June the 4th, my cystatin C was 0.8 milligrams per liter. Nice in the middle of the reference range. I've had it as low as 0.69 milligrams per liter, I think, at the end of the fasting mimicking diet. And the highest it's around 1 milligrams per liter. So every test that I've ever done about cystatin C has been in range, but right, considering I've had disproportionate high amounts of muscle mass and creatine supplementation or PQQ supplementation all at the same time, my creatinine has been a little bit higher, 1.5, 1.7 milligrams per liter. Now, luckily, I was able to get that down to 1.1 milligrams per liter by going off cycle and reducing the training intensity, right? So, but I do expect the creatinine to go up a little bit in the future. Let's see, uric acid on June the 4th was 5.7 milligrams per liter in range. Creatine phosphate kinase was 426 units per liter, but it got a little bit lower on June the 27th from 426 to 343 units per liter. And I honestly think that just because I switched my training split around before I did chest and quads before the weekend, and now I do that earlier in the week because I feel I have a little bit more energy. And I also feel that I still need to improve my chest and my quads over my back, my hamstring, right? Everything that's on the back of me, it's actually quite developed. It's not very fair because I look in the mirror to the front of me. But hey, genetics, you can't really beat it. So I've been moving my chest and quad workout to the beginning of the week because, of course, Sunday is a little bit of a cheat day, a little bit of a refeed day, and on Monday and Tuesday, I generally have more energy. But it also means that creatine phosphokinase levels decline over the duration of a week because the back workout, the hamstring workouts are not as intense as the chest or the quad workout. So I'm going to write it off as because of that. Now, I also checked my lipase, amylase, and fasted insulin levels on June the 4th. I just wanted to see if the liraglutide or the semaglutide that I took in the past, the GLP-1 receptor agonist, if you're not sure what those are, watch the video right here. I wanted to see if they would have an effect on pancreatic function, and these lipase, amylase, and fasting insulin levels are actually pretty comparable to where they are before. So they're all in range. I did not retest this again. I would just see this as a normal result, and there's no need to retest them. And again, I'm going to meet the cardiologist, not a diabetes or pancreas specialist. Check my growth hormone. I was running growth hormone at the time. I did not administer growth hormone before doing blood work. So my natural growth hormone concentrations at 8 a.m. in the morning is 1.77 nanograms per milliliter. But you see that the IGF-1 is pretty much to the top of the reference range. I've had it as high as 300 nanograms per milliliter. I've had it as low as 80 nanograms per milliliter after running 500 milligrams of metformin before bed for a couple weeks in a row. And in this case, I was using 2 IUs of growth hormone before fasted cardio and 500 milligrams of berberine before bed, which can lower IGF-1 a little bit. Honestly, I've never really seen a huge difference on my blood work results, but there is evidence out there that berberine has a little bit of a negative effect on serum IGF-1 concentrations. Even then, 2 units of growth hormone leading up to this blood work gave me an IGF-1 of 225 nanograms per milliliter. Again, I'm watching this on my laptop. So if I hunch forward a little bit, it's just to get a confirmation of what I'm reading. I did not retest my growth hormone or IGF-1 levels again. Currently, I'm not really interested in my IGF-1 levels because I discontinued the growth hormone, so it's pretty safe to say that they're going to be a little bit lower. Check my C-reactive protein. As usual, on June the 4th, it was 0.4 milligrams per liter. I did not retest that again. Again, it's been low pretty much the entire way through to this no anabolic androgenic steroid protocol. I just wanted to see if the exogenous kisspeptin 10 or GHK copper would cause an inflammatory response. So in this case, it did not. I did not feel it required to test that again. Usually it fluctuates between 0.2 to 0.4. Maybe when I go back on PEDs and increase my training intensity accordingly, my C-reactive protein might come up to 0.5 milligrams per liter. Hopefully not 1 milligram per liter, but usually it's around 0.5, 0.2, right? Depending on how hard I've trained. Again, there's many different aspects that can increase your inflammatory markers, whether that's the C-reactive protein or the homocysteine. I've never seen homocysteine out of range in my blood work, so I don't check that frequently. The lipid profile is very interesting. So we can do a direct comparison because I have my lipid profile before, on June 4th, before discontinuing the 10 milligrams ezetimibe per day. And I have them now, last weekend, after coming off ezetimibe for about 3 weeks. So before, on 10 milligrams ezetimibe per day, my cholesterol was 162 milligrams per liter. Triglycerides a little bit higher, 57 milligrams per deciliter, a little bit higher than now. HDL cholesterol 66 milligrams per deciliter. LDL cholesterol 84 milligrams per deciliter. And lipoprotein (a) 27 milligrams per deciliter. All in range. I would still like to see the LDL cholesterol a little bit lower. But again, I'm very happy with those readings, or at least I was very happy with those readings. Again, my HDL and LDL cholesterol had a much better ratio when I was doing the fasting mimicking diet, or when I was using selective estrogen receptor modulators like Nolvadex and clomiphene during my post-cycle therapy. So my lipids have normalized a little bit over time. Again, this is the first reading that I have of lipoprotein (a), because apparently due to miscommunication, I was informed that it was not available, but it is. So from now on, I will be testing it. I found some evidence that ezetimibe is able to reduce lipoprotein (a) concentrations in the bloodstream, and I also found some evidence that exogenous testosterone is able to do the same thing. So I just wanted to see how much of a change would occur by taking the ezetimibe out. Now, 3 weeks after taking it out, my cholesterol is pretty much the same, 167 milligrams per deciliter. Triglycerides came down a little bit, 37 milligrams per deciliter. I don't think that that's related to the ezetimibe. I think it's just a moment in time. Again, morning triglycerides fluctuate a little bit. Sometimes you're in a rush, cortisol goes up, you release a little bit of triglycerides in the bloodstream. These are all nicely balanced. Usually mine fluctuate between 30, 50, 60 milligrams per deciliter on blood work results. Now my HDL came down to 57 milligrams per deciliter, and my LDL came up to 106 milligrams per deciliter. In these last 3 weeks, I did not change anything to my diet, still eating the same ketogenic diet, getting 3 whole eggs, salmon, a little bit of cholesterol from that. So I eat about 1,100 milligrams of dietary cholesterol per day. Fiber intake hasn't changed. I'm still taking 1,000 milligrams of citrus bergamot. I took that on June the 4th, and I'm still taking that now. So that's 500 milligrams citrus bergamot in the morning and in the evening. I'm taking fish oil with each meal. I'm doing 30 minutes of cardio every day. In both blood work results, there's no GW1516 in my system, which might have a positive effect on HDL to LDL ratio. between the lipid panel of June the 4th and June the 27th, the only thing that has really changed is taking the Ezetimibe out. So you see that my HDL came down and my LDL came up. And my lipoprotein a came up a little bit from 27 to 29 milligrams per deciliter. Now, 29 milligrams per deciliter is at the top of the reference range. Would I be concerned going forward that it will go over the reference range? Not really. Again, it's a small change. It's not as a dramatic change compared to the HDL and the LDL. But if I were to remain drug-free in the future, I would prefer to run Ezetimibe as a method to keep my lipids absolutely perfect. And of course, if I were to go on anabolic androgenic steroids again in the future, I would definitely add in 10 milligrams of Ezetimibe, considering that my HDL and LDL, now drug-free or steroid-free, are very comparable to when I was running anabolic androgenic steroids before without the Ezetimibe also. So I've seen my HDL 45, 50, 55 milligrams per deciliter on anabolic steroids. And actually a quite high dose of testosterone, my HDL was very comparable. And my LDL as well, 100, 105, 110, 120 milligrams per deciliter, right, on particular PED combinations. So I do feel that the Ezetimibe is very beneficial when you look at your lipid levels, drug-free, and in the future perhaps enhanced. Again, I've recommended Ezetimibe to a lot of my clients who are running anabolic androgenic steroids, and their lipids are actually very favorable, certainly very more favorable, much better ratio between HDL and LDL compared to before not having the 10 milligrams Ezetimibe in their protocol. And the Ezetimibe then over time improved their lipid ratios to a little bit more favorable ranges, right? Are they perfectly in range? Perhaps not, but again, anabolic androgenic steroids have a negative effect on serum lipids. So I just wanted to see a comparison. You see that there's a couple points off the HDL and a couple points on top of the LDL over the course of 3 weeks without 10 milligrams Ezetimibe. I did a full liver function test on June the 4th, and I retested my liver enzymes on June 27th. On June the 4th, my total protein, albumin, globulin, albumin to globulin ratio, total and direct bilirubin, alkaline phosphatase, and gamma-GT were all in range. And my liver enzymes, the AST was 34 units per liter, so that's basically towards the top of the reference range. ALT was 30 units per liter. Now, I've got them as low as 10, 15, 20 units per liter after finishing the fasting mimicking diet. But during the time I was not doing any hypertrophy training, right? I decided to take 6 weeks off from the gym just to focus on the fasting mimicking diet to resolve the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I pretty much confirmed with an ultrasound that it was no longer present at that time. Now, after that, I reintroduced training, right? Increased my training intensity, so my liver enzymes came up a little bit. I think you can see that also in the icing the testicles video, where I showed that my liver enzymes came up a little bit compared to the fasting mimicking diet blood work results. So they've stayed pretty much the same, around 34, 32, 30 units per liter on both the AST and ALT, because you have to keep in mind that these enzymes are also found in skeletal muscle. And when you train for hypertrophy, these transaminases can leak into the bloodstream, raising the markers which are associated with liver health, even though the transferases are coming from skeletal muscle. So it stayed pretty much the same over the last couple of weeks. Also probably because my training intensity has stayed pretty much the same, right? I'm doing similar intensity on the cardio, similar intensity in the gym. Strength has stagnated a little bit. And I would assume that liver enzymes would not be increasing, similar to how the creatine phosphokinase concentrations aren't really increasing. Again, because it's related to the training intensity, which is unfortunately stagnating as of now. On June the 4th, I also checked my serum electrolytes. Again, I had a little bit of an adverse reaction after introducing the Telmisartan to my Nebivolol. I was running 5 milligrams Nebivolol pretty much for the last couple of months, just as a preventative measure to keep my heart rate down and improve cardiac function after coming off cycle, where the last time I did an ultrasound of my heart, I was diagnosed with an enlarged heart. So I've been running 5 milligrams Nebivolol for a pretty long time now because it has been associated with positive heart remodeling. Now, I wanted to experiment a little bit with Telmisartan. The problem is that Nebivolol is associated with hyperkalemia, and Telmisartan is associated with hyperkalemia. Now, I did not get any hyperkalemia symptoms on 5 milligrams Nebivolol in combination with adding potassium supplements or potassium chloride coming from low sodium iodized potassium salt. So in that sense of the potassium salt with Nebivolol, I did not experience any hyperkalemia issues. But then when I added in 20 milligrams Telmisartan, I got hyperkalemia symptoms, micro twitching of particular muscles, but also got edema in my ankles, which is commonly related to sodium. So I think that having the potassium salt and adding in the Telmisartan changed something to the renin, vasopressin, and angiotensin system, causing me to maybe go into a hyperkalemic state while simultaneously dumping or altering how my body retains sodium. So I immediately discontinued the potassium salt, and the issue resolved itself in a day, right? The microcramp stopped in a day, and the edema went away in a day or two. So I did not do any blood work at that time because I didn't want to wait, right? I'm not going to continue with the potassium salt if I'm having an adverse reaction just waiting for blood work. I just discontinued that right away. So I can't confirm that my potassium levels were elevated at the time or anything was skewed at my serum electrolytes because I did not want to wait. So I discontinued the potassium salt. I continued with the Telmisartan to get some experience with the compound. And then I checked my serum electrolytes on June the 4th, which are all within normal parameters, right? My sodium, potassium, chloride, total carbon dioxide, calcium, and magnesium, all within normal parameters and pretty comparable to where they are on Nebivolol by itself or Nebivolol with potassium salt, or without the Nebivolol and without the potassium salt, right? So usually your body is pretty good at regulating serum electrolyte levels. In Nebivolol's instance and Telmisartan instance, it's maybe occurs in a fraction of a percentage of the individuals that take these blood pressure medications, beta blockers by themselves. But when you double dip, or you take them both at the same time, there's an increased risk, especially when you're taking additional potassium. So in my case, I suspect that I experienced a little bit of hyperkalemia. Discontinuing the additional potassium salt was able to resolve that issue, which I reintroduced after discontinuing the Nebivolol and the Telmisartan on June the 5th. So I reintroduced the potassium salt since then because I feel that it improves my contraction. I lose a lot of electrolytes while I'm sweating in the gym, right? So I'm always very careful about my electrolyte intake. I like to manage that besides the electrolytes that I get from the vegetables and the carbohydrate sources. And there's a decent amount of potassium in eggs and the protein sources that I have. So I always try to micromanage my electrolyte intake, but I need to reassess my electrolyte intake whenever I reintroduce the Nebivolol, Telmisartan in the future again, if I feel that I need it. I would consider 5 milligrams of Nebivolol drug-free over Telmisartan because I don't really have an issue with blood pressure right now, again, because I'm managing my electrolyte intake. And I feel that the Nebivolol is not as pronounced regarding a reduction in blood pressure, but it does lower my heart rate. And again, I like this positive association with heart remodeling. So, right, in a positive sense, not in a negative sense where cabergoline or nandrolone, right, there's in a negative sense associated with heart remodeling regarding left ventricular hypertrophy, for example, right? So I would consider Nebivolol in the future because my testosterone levels didn't really decline or went up after introducing or discontinuing the Nebivolol. Let's move on to the iron study, which I just did again as a confirmation for the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I didn't retest my iron, but I checked my ferritin on June the 4th and June the 27th. On June the 4th, my iron was 145 milligrams per deciliter. That's slowly been going down over the last couple of months, again, because I follow a pescatarian diet. I have beef maybe once per week, so that's not a lot of iron, and I don't supplement with any iron with a multivitamin or other kinds of supplements. Ferritin was, I believe on May 2nd, it was a little bit lower, around 220 nanograms per milliliter, if I remember correctly. Then it went up to 245 nanograms per milliliter, and then it went down on June 27th, 206 nanograms per milliliter. Again, I'm just testing the ferritin levels because it's another marker which is associated with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I did not catch the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because my ferritin levels were not really elevated unless I would do a carnivore diet with a lot of beef. And since I suspect that my iron absorption is a little bit disproportionate to the general population, I absorb iron quite easily, even though it does not result in a very alarmingly high hematocrit like I see with some people, especially when they're on exogenous steroids, right, which are known to increase hematocrit and erythropoietic activity in the bone marrow. So in my case, I have to be a little bit careful with my iron intake. So nowadays I avoid beef, which has a very high concentration of hema iron, which is a little bit more bioavailable than the iron in quinoa or plant sources, right? So I've been checking my ferritin ever since, just to make sure that it's not coming up and that I'm managing my iron intake appropriately, right? I want all of those in the middle of the range, not at the top or over the range, right? Because a lot of iron in your body is also not a good thing. I am using a vitamin B100 complex supplement. My folate vitamin B9 is 17.1 nanograms per milliliter, which is in range, but they repeated that result, probably because my vitamin B12 is over 2000. So they just wanted to confirm if both values were correct. So I believe that over 2000 is the upper tolerable or upper detectable limit for B12 at Bria Labs. So again, assuming that my B100 complex is a little bit overdosed, I might have to switch to B50 complex formula because, my appetite is a little bit higher than usual, but again, I'm also probably in a caloric restricted state of 2,500 calories per day. So B12, for the guys who don't know, has a positive effect on your appetite. Usually you notice that a lot more with B12 injections. So some guys resort to that in the off season. I've been just having my B100 complex supplement, and I'm not in a position where I would want to increase my appetite any further beyond where it is now. Now, in preparation to talk with the cardiologist, I tested 3 cardiac markers at Bria Labs. The first one being a creatine phosphokinase myocardial band, which is another individual blood work markers to detect a heart attack. Now, creatine phosphokinase has a couple different isoenzymes, and the creatine phosphokinase mitochondrial band is particularly located in the heart and will spill into the bloodstream in case of a heart attack. So in my case, the first and only time that I checked my CKMB, so that marker was within normal parameters at 5.57 nanograms per milliliter, towards the top of the reference range, but still within the reference range. So my cardiologist didn't feel it was necessary to recheck the CKMB before our next meeting on July the 1st. On June the 1st, I also checked the NT-proBNP, which is another marker for heart functioning. The NT-proBNP stands for N-terminal prohormone of brain natriuretic peptides. And that's a marker that's related or associated with coronary artery disease, left ventricular dysfunctioning, or congestive heart failure. So in my case, that's also within range at 17.1 picograms per milliliter, which I'm very happy to see because, of course, a decade of exposure to anabolic androgenic steroids and not understanding how the effect of synthetic carrier oils would have on my C-reactive protein markers, which were elevated for a couple of years because I decided to go with underground labs, unknowingly how much of a negative effect they would have on the CRP concentrations. And of course, CRP might damage the insides of the arteries, contributing to cardiovascular disease and plaque buildup. So, right, I'm always a little bit, that's always in the back of my head. How much damage did I do to myself by using these underground labs with synthetic carrier oils? So I'm happy to see that the NT-proBNP is in range. Does that clear me of cardiovascular disease or left ventricular dysfunction? Obviously not. It's just a marker in the blood. And that's why I'm going to do an ultrasound, MRI, or CT scan. And given that the NT-proBNP marker is also within the reference range, my cardiologist said there was no need to retest that marker again. Now, on June the 4th, I also checked my high-sensitivity troponin T levels. Troponin T is part of a troponin complex, which is found in skeletal muscle and in heart muscle, and elevated concentrations in the bloodstream might also indicate a heart attack. Now, in my case, I have elevated or out of the reference range high-sensitivity troponin T results. The reference range goes up to 0.014 nanograms per milliliter, and my results are 0.017 nanograms per milliliter on June the 4th. I retested that again, even though my cardiologist said it was not necessary. I retested that again just to get another reading. So on June the 27th, my troponin T on a high-sensitivity test was 0.016 nanograms per milliliter. I would say that's a similar result. Since then, I've obviously been doing a lot of research into this troponin T marker, and I found some evidence that in endurance athletes, at least, that the troponin T levels might be elevated after particular endurance sports. I was not able to find a study what happens to strength sports athletes regarding their troponin T levels on a high-sensitivity test. I found an opposing study in untrained elderly where their troponin T levels went up slightly, then went down below baseline, going from an untrained state to a trained state over the duration of 12 to 24 weeks. A little bit conflict, right? But it's both in different scenarios. So I would lean a little bit more towards the endurance athletes study over the untrained elderly study regarding the changes in troponin T levels. My cardiologist said it was nothing to worry about, considering that I'm training, considering that my creatine phosphokinase levels are a little bit elevated, but not tremendously elevated. Again, those markers are also commonly associated with heart functioning, but increase quite dramatically with endurance sports or strength sports. Right, I've seen my CPK up to 2,000, 4,000, 5,000 even in combination with clenbuterol, which also raises creatine phosphokinase concentrations in the bloodstream. The transaminases can be elevated in the bloodstream from strength sports, right, as they leak from skeletal muscle, giving you a false positive on your liver enzymes, right? Even though the transaminases come from skeletal muscle, they detect as liver enzymes. So my cardiologist was not worried about it. Based on my research, I'm not really worried about slightly elevated troponin T on a high sensitivity test, considering that the range for a acute myocardial infarction, based on the World Health Organization, is 0.1? Yeah, 0.1 nanograms per milliliter. I could probably get those readings down by taking a week off from the gym. In both cases, on June the 4th, I trained the day before, or up until the day before the test. And on June 27th, again, I trained up until the day of the test. And maybe the reason why the troponin T went from 0.017 nanograms per milliliter down to 0.016 nanograms per milliliter is because I moved the more intense workouts to an earlier point in the week, allowing for troponin T levels to decline a little bit, considering that both blood work tests were performed over the weekend, right? Just speculating, guys. I'm just speculating. And finally, we're at the sex hormones. And if you use the timestamps to skip ahead, let us know in the comment sections that you came here for my endogenous testosterone production. Right, so I have pretty extensive blood work on June the 4th and June the 27th. I'll do the June 4th first. Estradiol was 29.8 picograms per milliliter. FSH, let's say 2 milliIUs per milliliter. LH, 2.3 milliIUs per milliliter. Progesterone, 0.13 nanograms per milliliter. Prolactin, middle of the range, 7.48 nanograms per milliliter. I have no idea why I checked prolactin. I just wanted to see it, right? I'm not doing anything to raise or lower my prolactin levels, besides bedroom activity, which are known to increase prolactin levels temporarily. Testosterone was 594 nanograms per deciliter, which is a little bit lower than the previous video the icing the testicles video where it was about, I think it was 630 nanograms per deciliter. So it came down a little bit. I have blood work somewhere in the middle where I just did a routine check where it was 550 nanograms per deciliter. Again, it's going to fluctuate, right? I'm just going to say that on average, my testosterone is 600 nanograms per deciliter. That's my basically my average testosterone, right, for the last couple of weeks. Now, leading into this blood work, I did 100 micrograms of kisspeptin 10 per day. And you see that compared to the previous blood work where my FSH, LH, estradiol, testosterone were all pretty comparable. Free testosterone was 7.93 nanograms per deciliter, a little bit on the low side. Bioavailable testosterone, 194 nanograms per deciliter. And sex hormone-binding globulin increased from give or take 50 nanomoles per liter on May the 2nd to 64.6 nanomoles per liter. And spoiler alert, as of last weekend, my sex hormone-binding globulin is 75.6 nanomoles per liter. I honestly think that's due to caloric restriction. I don't see any reason, right? I'm not using ACG. My estradiol concentrations are pretty comparable for the last couple of weeks. I'm not using a selective estrogen receptor modulator. I'm not using any thyroid match, right? When I was using growth hormone 2 units per day, I was also using 100 micrograms of T4, which I discontinued at the same time 3 weeks ago. So I honestly think that the slow and steady increases of sex hormone-binding globulin are due to now being in a caloric restrictive state. It is affecting my sex drive, right? One of the reasons why I did that PT141 experiment, which was able to increase my sex drive a little bit. But it's not the same as being on performance-enhancing drugs, obviously. So I'm fingers crossed this MRI gives me the green light so I can bring my sex drive back up to cycle-like levels. It's always highly desirable for myself and my partner. So the sex hormone-binding globulin has been slowly increasing over time. I suspect that's due to being now in a chronic caloric deficit, right? I increased my muscularity to the point that 2,500 calories is not really sufficient on a daily basis. And to be honest, I don't really have an appetite much on the weekend to really do an extensive refeed. So I just have, a little bit of a lunch and a dinner, but it's certainly not as big as I used to do, again, when my training intensity was way higher. So those are the those are the results from June the 4th. That was after taking 100 micrograms of kisspeptin 10 per day for 2 weeks leading into this blood work. Again, it's pretty comparable to a couple weeks prior. And I also did blood work after 100 micrograms kisspeptin 10 3 times per week, which also have pretty similar readings on FSH, LH, testosterone, and estrogen. So in my case, the kisspeptin 10 did not have a negative or positive effect on my blood work results, but I'm still going to do another experiment if I were to take anabolic androgenic steroids again to see if 100 micrograms kisspeptin 10 per day subcutaneously is able to somehow sustain FSH and LH concentrations while taking exogenous testosterone. Again, so we'll have to wait for those results. As of now, I'm going to say that the kisspeptin 10 I had, assuming that it was real, did not have a negative or positive effect on my blood work results. All right, moving on to June 27th. The results from last Sunday. I checked my beta ACG just to see if they're normal, right? I was there, so might as well check that marker also. Needless to say, it's undetectable because I'm a man, and beta ACG is usually only elevated in cases of a post-cycle therapy or if you're pregnant, right? And men usually don't get pregnant. So the last time I saw my beta ACG elevated was when I was running exogenous ACG. Check my estradiol again, 28.9 picograms per milliliter, pretty much the same as last time. FSH came up a little bit to 3.22 milliIUs per milliliter. LH came up also a little bit to 255 milliIUs per milliliter. Is that a 3-week delayed response from the kisspeptin 10? I don't think so. Progesterone came down a little bit, 0.1 nanograms per milliliter. Testosterone came down a little bit more, 5 590 nanograms per deciliter. Again, all pretty comparable. All my blood work results I take at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock, 8:15, right? I try to get a good night's sleep in so I have the most accurate results, not affected from having a bad day the day before, right? So my Saturday is usually pretty chill. Go to bed early, and then Sunday I do my blood work. But on June the 4th, that was a Friday, I believe, because I had the cardiologist appointment on Saturday. So again, I always try to prepare properly, test my testosterone levels at the same time to make sure that they don't dip. And to be honest, when I had that reading of 550 or give about 550 nanograms per deciliter, I think that's because I didn't have a good night's sleep the night before. Again, everything was the same, diet was the same, icing the testicles was the same. Health supplementation is just the same, right? The vitamin D3, the carnitine, the magnesium, zinc, blah, blah, blah. That's all still the same. Free testosterone last weekend, 7.03 nanograms per deciliter, even lower than before because my sex-hormone binding globulin is now higher. Bioavailable testosterone, 150 or 165 nanograms per deciliter, a little bit lower as well. DHA sulfate, 254 nanograms or micrograms per deciliter. I should enlarge this a little bit so I can actually read it. So that's pretty much in the middle of the reference range. I don't have any other data points. I should have done that, the DHA sulfate, the last time. I completely overlooked to test that. I was just assuming that it was going to be right within the reference range with a normal functioning HPTA and HPAA. But I will definitely incorporate some DHA supplementation in the future when I decide to go on the PED gain train again. Or I'm getting sufficient levels, or I'm able to sustain DHA sulfate with a kisspeptin 10 protocol. And again, if that kisspeptin 10 protocol is not sufficient, I'm going to switch over to perhaps a gonadorelin protocol or buserelin, whatever I can source. And if that's not successful, then I'm going to be looking at HMG or ACG. I'm just going to go down the list. Kisspeptin 10 first, ineffective, the gonadotropin releasing hormone receptor agonist method. And if that's unsuccessful, at least I'm going to go keep the fertility train going with an ACG or HMG, whatever I can source. Right? That's always an issue. Yeah, a little bit of a spoiler for the fertility video that's coming up maybe a week or so from now. I literally masturbated in each private hospital of Bangkok to get human menopausal gonadotropin prescribed. And up until now, considering that the fertility is just ever increasing, I was unsuccessful. So probably if the kisspeptin 10 or gonadorelin is not effective to sustain my HPTA, if I were to go on anabolic steroids again, it's going to be ACG, right? Because, the ordering right now online and risking the peptide from denaturing in the mail while Thailand is disgustingly hot. Yeah, it's not something I'm willing to risk for the price that HMG is going for nowadays. All right, so that's a little bit of a tangent. Right, SHBG 75.6 nanomoles per liter. Do I have any more blood work? Hemoglobin A1c. Well, that's still 4.9% on June the 4th. I did not retest that. Right, it's a ketogenic diet. Usually keeps my hemoglobin A1c between 4.7 to 5%. No alarmingly high glucose concentrations in my bloodstream. Thank you very much. And I think that pretty much covers everything, guys. Oh, this video is going to be so long. My apologies for the guys that stick around to the end. You guys are freaking awesome. You're part of the Vigorous crew. You guys know what to do if you haven't already. I'm sure you already liked. I'm sure you already commented. Feel free to leave another comment. That's highly appreciated. This is basically the update as of now. I would say I'm healthy enough to go on a baby cycle of 125 milligrams testosterone per week plus 100 milligrams of primobolan per week. I don't think that's going to raise my hematocrit levels dramatically. I would add in 10 milligrams of Ezetimibe on top to keep my lipids favorable, considering that it had such a dramatic effect on my lipids before or without anabolic androgenic steroids in my system. I'll write that 125 milligrams test plus 100 milligrams of Primo per week out for as long as possible. Then I might add 2.5 milligrams of sublingual Anavar on workout days. I've discontinued the growth hormone for 3 weeks because I don't want any additional water retention. Right? So I will not be reintroducing the growth hormone for a while now. I want to see how much of an effect this potential baby cycle will have on my face. For the guys who are new subscribers, give this video a watch about how to look youthful on cycle. I will do my absolute best to incorporate all of that so I can stay looking youthful. I don't want that old bloat monster face, the Michelin Man. I want the muscle gains. I highly doubt I'm going to get most of them back, but maybe a hint of it. But I don't want that Michelin Man face back again in the future. So that would be basically the baby cycle. I will maybe incorporate growth hormone at one point when I'm sub 10% body fat. Right now, I'm assuming I'm probably 15, depending on how I look in the mirror. Maybe it's even more. Who knows? Pictures will come at one point or another. No insulin. I will not be running that. I will be running a kisspeptin 10 experiment and then work my way down the list to sustain fertility, right? I'm assuming I'm going to end up at ACG 3 times a week, which will then be 250 IUs 3 times per week. And if I can search HMG, I will run 37.5 IUs recombinant HMG 3 times per week instead. I feel that it's a little bit more beneficial compared to the ACG, and it's a lower dose, albeit that the costs are significantly higher. But all of that highly depends on the results of the MRI or CT scan, which I will do shortly, right? I will discuss all of those results with my cardiologist and then give you guys an update regarding my progression going forward. If there's an issue, I will have to address that. I don't suspect there's an issue. My cardiologist doesn't suspect there's an issue. I just want to do the testing to put the hypochondriac at bay, considering that I took anabolic steroids for 10 years. For a few years, I was running underground labs, increasing my systemic inflammatory markers. And during that time, my lipids were not 100% either, right? That's because of the steroid. So I just want to have a confirmation and a green light that my heart is functioning accordingly. No backflow, no coronary artery disease, no plaque buildup, no weird electrical conductivity. Right, I just want to have a green light, and once I have that green light, then in my opinion, my gain train can get rolling again. So fingers crossed. You guys, cross your fingers for me too. And I'll leave it at that, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigoroussteve.com/shop. Looking for personalized advice, I'm always available for consultations. You can find the consultation rates in the consultation section. Follow me on Instagram at VigorSteve. There's a link tree there now with a ton of links to my website, to the subreddit, to the Podbean or the Spotify, right? You can find all of those links there in the link tree on my Instagram. Vigorous crew, you already did what you needed to do. Much appreciated. Much love. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.